Revenge of the Living Dummy, Chapter 11. My breath caught in my throat. I staggered back till I hit the wall. The dummy stared at me with that ugly grin. Then he slowly lowered himself back onto his pillow. This can't be happening, I told myself, but it is. Something terrifying is going on here. Ethan is downstairs. The dummy sat up on its own and spoke, and it hates me. My legs trembled as I forced myself away from the wall. I kept my gaze on Mr. Bad Boy. His eyes stayed wide open, staring up at the ceiling, but he didn't move again. I lurched toward the door, stumbled over the jeans on the floor, staggered to the attic stairs, breathing hard. I don't like you, Brittany. The dummy's hoarse rasp repeated in my ears. You're not alive, I cried, taking the stairs two at a time. You can't be alive. I couldn't keep this to myself. I was too frightened. I had to tell Mom and Dad. I burst into the den. The room was dark except for the darting glare of the screen. They always turn out the lights when they watch a movie. They were on the couch, sitting close together, bowls of popcorn in their laps. Mom jumped as I came lurching in. She made a grab for the popcorn bowl, but it toppled to the floor. Popcorn spilled everywhere. Brittany, you startled me, she cried. Look what you made me do. Dad paused the movie. He narrowed his eyes at me. What on earth is your problem? I stammered. Something, I gasped for breath. Dad pulled me to the couch. I dropped down next to Mom. You're trembling, Mom said. Are you sick? Do you have a fever? It's the dummy, I finally choked out. Ethan's dummy. They both stared at me. It's crazy, I said. I know it, but I'm telling the truth. It's alive. It's really alive. Mom wrapped her arms around my shoulders. Take a deep breath, Britt, she said softly. You're not making any sense. Start at the beginning, Dad said. We don't understand what you're saying. What about Ethan's dummy? I took a deep breath and let it out. My painting of Phoebe, it's ruined. And my Skullboy poster was ripped in half. I knew Ethan did it, so I ran up to his room. Your Skullboy poster? Mom interrupted. Are you sure the frame didn't just fall off the wall? I'm sure, I said. I ran up to Ethan's room, and he wasn't there. He was in the shower, but the dummy, it sat up. I saw Mom and Dad exchange a glance. Mom pressed her hand on my forehead. I don't have a fever, I screamed, and I shoved her hand away. Listen to me. The dummy sat up on its own, and it talked. It said, I don't like you, Brittany. I'm not making this up. That's what it said to me. You fell asleep, Dad said, rubbing his chin. You had a nightmare, remember? You used to sleepwalk? Dad, that was when I was 3, I cried. I wasn't asleep. I just got home from Molly's. I was wide awake. I jumped to my feet, my whole body trembling. Are you going to believe me or not? Mom patted the couch cushion. Sit down, Britt. I shook my head and crossed my arms in front of me. How can we believe you, Dad said. It's crazy. The dummy didn't talk on its own, Mom said. Ethan was playing a trick on you. I'll bet he was under the bed or hiding in the closet. I think you've been spending too much time at the Malloys, Dad said. Wildman Malloy and his weirdo dolls. They've put strange ideas in your head, Britt, he shrugged. Maybe you shouldn't see so much of Molly. Huh? I let out an angry cry. Now I'm going to lose my best friend because of that evil little creep Ethan? Don't call him an evil little creep, Mom snapped. He's your cousin. He's family, and he needs our help. We need you to be the grown-up, Dad said. Making up crazy stories about dummies coming to life isn't going to help anyone. Dad, I'm not making this up, I said in a trembling voice. My hands were balled into fists again. I could feel myself totally losing it. I bit my lips till they hurt. No way I was going to start sobbing now. I know it sounds crazy, I said, but the dummy's alive, and it's evil. They both stared at me, as if I were crazy. I spun around and ran from the den. I hurtled into my room and slammed the door. I threw myself onto the bed, but I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. My own parents refused to listen to me, refused to believe me. My own parents treated me as if I were a nut. I turned and gazed at my torn poster, my dog portrait with the ugly red splotches smeared over it. There they were, my 2 favorite things ruined, destroyed. I didn't make it up. The proof was there on the wall. I tiptoed to the door and listened. Did my parents just shrug off my story and go back to their movie? No, it was quiet down there. They were probably cleaning up the spilled popcorn and discussing what to do with their problem daughter. I picked up my cell phone to call Molly, but I realized it was too late to call. I'll never get to sleep, I thought. How can I sleep knowing there's something evil in my house? I changed into my nightshirt, climbed into bed, and pulled the blankets over my head. But I could still see the torn poster, the red paint on my painting, the dummy, the evil dummy raising his head and spouting those ugly words, I don't like you, Brittany. Somehow, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I pulled on jeans and a sweater and got myself ready for school. I felt weary, as if I hadn't slept at all. Every time I glanced at the poster and painting, my stomach tightened in cold dread. I looked out my window. It was a gray morning. Dark clouds hung low in the sky. The darkness matched my mood. I left my room and headed for the stairs. I could smell coffee from the kitchen and bacon frying. I heard footsteps behind me and glimpsed Ethan coming down the attic stairs holding Mr. Bad Boy in front of him. I pretended I didn't see him, started down the steps. I was almost halfway down when I heard Ethan's shout close behind me. "Brittany, watch out!" "Hey!" I uttered a cry as I felt hard wooden hands shove my back. Stumbling, I grabbed for the banister, missed, and started to fall headfirst down the stairs. Chapter 12. Oh! I tucked my head under my arms and bumped hard all the way down. Ow, ow, ow! I landed on my back, still shielding my head, gasping for breath, too stunned to move. I lay there, waiting for the pain to fade. I stared up at Ethan and Mr. Bad Boy, still on the stairs. Ethan's face had gone pale. His eyes were wide with shock. "Brittany, are you all right?" he cried in a tiny, frightened voice. He came running down to me. The dummy bounced in his arms. "What's going on?" Mom called from the kitchen. "Brittany fell," Ethan shouted. "I didn't fall. I thought the dummy pushed me." I rubbed my elbow. It throbbed with pain, but the rest of me seemed okay. Ethan grabbed my hand and tried to pull me up. Mom came running, a metal spatula in one hand. "Oh no, Brittany, did you fall down the stairs?" "Just a few of them," I said. "No big deal, Mom." Why tell the truth? Would she believe me if I said the dummy pushed me? Yeah, for sure. She'd blame my wild imagination, or she'd say I watched too many horror movies. I climbed to my feet, rubbing my sore elbow. "I'm okay, really." "My bacon's burning," Mom said. Come have your breakfast." She turned and hurried back to the stove. I glared at Ethan. "You and I have to talk," I said. He turned his head away. He looked very frightened. Then he looked back and said, "Listen, Britt, But before he could say any more, the dummy lowered his head to my ear and whispered in his cold, hoarse voice, "Don't ever snitch on me again." Chapter 13. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't get that dummy's whispered words out of my mind. I was desperate to tell Molly about it, but she was away all day on some kind of science field trip. I phoned her after school, but she couldn't talk. She was going to visit some cousins in the next town over. She didn't call me back until late that night. I was pulling on my nightshirt and getting ready for bed when my cell phone rang. She started talking before I even answered. "Molly, what's wrong?" I asked. She sounded totally freaked. "Brittany, hurry," she said. "You've got to help me. We have to bury it." "Huh?" "Molly, what are you talking about?" I whispered. "I'm not allowed to talk on the phone so late at night." "The doll," Molly said breathlessly. "That awful thing with the shrunken head. I can't leave it in our house. Please come over. I need your help." "But it's after 11, I whispered. "If I get caught—" "Brittany, this is life or death," Molly said. "I'm not joking. I need you." "I'll get dressed," I said. "I'll sneak out the back door. Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes later, I was running through backyards and across the street to Molly's house. The grass was slippery and wet due to the weather. I lowered my head against the strong gusts of wind. Molly's house was dark, except for a light in the attic window. But she stood waiting for me at the back door. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen. She had already pulled on a yellow rain slicker and had the hood lowered over her head. "We have to hurry," she whispered. "Molly, I don't understand," I said. "Tell me, what's up with that doll?" She brushed back the rain hood. I could see the fear in her eyes. "The mind stealer. My dad. He was wrong. We have to bury it. In a graveyard." I narrowed my eyes at her. "You're not joking? Where's your dad?" "On an island somewhere," she said. "Near Australia, I think. I tried to call him. I don't think his cell is working." "But why do we have to bury that doll? That's just crazy, isn't it?" "A man called me," Molly said, "a few minutes ago, from Mumba. He said my dad asked him for information about the Mind Stealer doll, and... "Molly, what did he say?" I asked. "He said he did research for my dad. He talked to people in Mumba. The doll's powers are deadly strong. It shouldn't be kept in the house. My dad didn't know. It has to be buried in a graveyard." I stared at her. "He was serious?" "Very serious," Molly said. "He said to get the doll out of the house tonight. He said maybe it's all just an old legend, but we shouldn't take chances. It's too dangerous." She grabbed my hand. "You've got to help me, Britt. I'm really scared. I knew the doll was trouble. My dad, sometimes he just doesn't take things seriously." "What about Margie?" I asked. "Your housekeeper. Can she help us?" "She has the flu," Molly replied. "I can't ask her to come out." Molly stared at the glass case in fear. "I'll carry the doll case," she shivered. "There's a shovel in the garage. You can carry that." And that's how Molly and I ended up in the little graveyard 3 blocks away from our houses. Nearly midnight, The neighborhood dark, no cars in the street, no moon in the cloud-covered sky. Cold raindrops pattered down on us. There we were, taking turns shoveling up the hard dirt. Inside the glass case, the evil doll stared up at us with its empty eye sockets and its shriveled green head. The wind howled. The old gravestones creaked and groaned. Could we get the evil doll buried before it did something horrible to us? Could it get any scarier? Yes. The hole was at least 2 feet deep, almost deep enough. I dug the shovel blade into the dirt, and that's when the old gravestone across from me tilted forward. I saw crumbling dirt at the bottom of the stone, and then I saw the pale hand reach out from behind it. Too late. I saw it too late to escape its grip. It grabbed me around the ankle, wrapped its cold fingers over my skin, and I let out a shrill scream. "Ethan," I gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Made you scream," he said. He let go of my ankle. Then he jumped out from behind the tombstone and did a little dance, laughing like a hyena. Molly gave him a hard shove, and he fell back against an old granite slab. "You brat," she snapped. "You followed us here?" He grinned. "You're burying that stupid doll? You're both totally mental." The rain came down harder, drumming the ground. I pretended to strangle Ethan. "I'd like to bury you," I said. "I know what happens at midnight," Ethan said. "You both turn into pumpkins." "This isn't a joke," Molly said angrily. "Get away, Ethan." She shoved him again. "Unless you want to help us. We have to bury this thing. It really does steal minds." Ethan giggled. "You're both out of your minds already." A flash of lightning made the ugly mind stealer doll appear to move. I felt a chill roll down my back. I dug the shovel deep into the hole and scooped out another clump of dirt. I think it's deep enough," I said. Ethan watched as Molly and I carefully lifted the glass case. The disgusting little head rolled to one side. The doll's wooden arms bounced against the glass. Into the hole. We lowered it slowly. The glass case felt slippery and wet from the rain, but we set it down in the hole. Then we both frantically shoveled and scooped dirt over it. Buried it out of sight, where its evil powers could do no damage. And then the three of us ran for home, battered by the rain and the wind. Molly had a smile on her face now. At least she could feel safe again in her own house. But what about me? No way I could feel safe, not with a living dummy turning my life into a horror show. Chapter 14. "Mom, please don't make me take Ethan," I begged. Mom bit her bottom lip. "Brittany, you have no choice," she said. "You promised him, remember? You have to take him." She straightened her hair in the front hall mirror and picked up the car keys. It was nearly 4 the next afternoon. She was ready to drive us to perform at Sunset House, my great-aunt's retirement home. "Brittany, do you have all your art supplies packed up? Put them in the trunk," she said. She started to the door, but I grabbed her arm. "Mom, you're not listening to me," I said. "If we take Ethan, something terrible is going to happen." "Stop it right now," she said. "Go call your cousin. He's upstairs practicing his comedy act." My throat felt tight and dry. "I know you don't believe me," I said, "but I'm not making this up. Mr. Bad Boy is alive, Mom. He's alive and he's evil." Mom slammed the car keys down in the hallway shelf. She glared at me angrily. "Enough," she said. "Enough, enough, enough. You're acting like a total baby, Brittany." "But Mom, I can prove it," I said. She raised a hand. "Enough, enough. Not another word. I mean it. Not another word about that dummy." My breath caught in my throat. I felt so hurt and angry. Mom always believed me before Ethan came to live with us. She always trusted me. She always talked about how grown up I was, and now... She pointed to the stairs. "Go get Ethan. Great Aunt Ruth is waiting." I let out a long sigh and started up the stairs. I knew if I brought Ethan and Mr. Bad Boy with me, something terrible would happen, but what could I do? A short while later, Mom pulled the car up the long driveway to Sunset House. We passed by tall hedges and a rolling lawn with beds of red and yellow flowers. People sat in chairs around a bubbling fountain, talking and reading. The house was a tall brick building. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the many windows, making the whole house appear to glow. I pulled my art supplies from the trunk and waved to Mom as she drove away. Great Aunt Ruth was waiting for Ethan and me in the front hall. She is almost 85, but she looks a lot younger. She has short, straight black hair, and she wears a lot of makeup and bright red lipstick. Today she wore faded jeans with embroidery on the pockets and a pale blue shirt that tied at the waist. After giving Ethan and me bone-crushing hugs, she began chattering a mile a minute, asking about everyone in the family. A short, plump, gray-haired woman wearing a gray pantsuit stepped up with a smile. "Brittany, this is so nice of you," she said. "Hi, Mrs. Berman," I said. She's the director of the house. This is my cousin Ethan. He's going to perform with his dummy. How excellent, she said. Come this way. Your audience is waiting for you in the rec room. We followed her down the hall and into the room. Folding chairs had been set up in 3 rows. About 20 people turned when we came in. Most of them were white-haired. 2 were in wheelchairs, and I saw a lot of canes and walkers. I put down my paint case and started to set up my easel. Ethan took a seat in a corner and plopped Mr. Bad Boy on his lap. This is Ruth's niece, Brittany Crosby, Mrs. Berman announced. She is going to give you all a painting lesson, and then Brittany's cousin Evan is going to put on a puppet show. It's Ethan, Mr. Bad Boy shouted. People began to murmur. A few people laughed. I opened my paint jars and turned to the audience. I know a lot of you like to draw and paint, I said, so I thought, louder please, a woman in the front row shouted. So I thought today she's deaf, another woman called out. She won't hear you no matter how loud you shout. A lot of people laughed. Great Aunt Ruth turned in her seat and shushed everyone. I took a deep breath and continued. Since we're in Sunset House, I thought I'd show you how to paint a beautiful sunset with just 2 colors, red and yellow. I picked up the brush and began to mix colors. Maybe she could paint my room, a man in the back row said to the woman next to him. Maybe she could paint my nails, the woman said. They were both shouting. They must have been nearly deaf. I could feel my legs start to shake. Mom had warned me it would be a tough audience. I turned and saw Great Aunt Ruth smiling at me. I decided to keep my eyes on her for the rest of the demonstration. What is she painting? I don't get this modern art. Look, she dripped on the floor. I should have worn earplugs, but I hummed to myself to drown them out. And I kept working my brush on the canvas. The sunset painting turned out really well, maybe the best sunset I'd ever done. And when I stepped away from it, everyone cheered and clapped, even the woman who wanted me to paint her nails. Great Aunt Ruth blew me a kiss. I could tell how proud she was. I felt really happy, but then I remembered what was coming next, and my stomach tightened in dread. Here's Ethan, I announced to everyone, with his good friend Mr. Bad Boy. As Ethan passed me, I whispered, "Don't mess up." "I'll try," he whispered back. Why did he look so frightened? Chapter 15. Ethan pulled his folding chair to the front of the room. He sat down and bounced the dummy on his lap. "Which one is Ethan?" a woman whispered loudly. A few people laughed. Ethan cleared his throat and turned to the grinning dummy. "You're going to be a good boy today, aren't you, Mr. Bad Boy?" Mr. Bad Boy shook his head. No. "I'm a bad boy. Know how I can tell when someone is old?" he asked Ethan. "How?" "By the smell." Mr. Bad Boy tossed back his head and cackled. "That's not funny," Ethan scolded him. "Yeah," Mr. Bad Boy shot back. "That joke stinks, and so do they." A few people gasped. The room grew very quiet. Mr. Bad Boy's jaws clicked up and down. "Ethan, do you know the difference between an old person and roadkill?" "No," Ethan said. "Neither do I," Mr. Bad Boy cried and laughed his high-pitched laugh again. "That is not allowed," Mrs. Berman shouted from the back of the room. "Ethan, your jokes are insulting people." "Your face is insulting me," Mr. Bad Boy exclaimed. "I've seen pimples that were prettier than you." I shut my eyes. I just wanted to disappear. This couldn't be happening. "I'm a bad boy," Mr. Bad Boy shouted. He turned his head to a woman with curly white hair and bright red lips. Is that a new skirt?" the dummy asked her. "Or are you wearing your intestines on the outside?" Mrs. Berman stormed toward the front of the room, swinging tight fists at her side. Her face was as red as my sunset painting. "Ethan, I have to ask you to stop," she said. Ethan jumped up. "I'm really sorry," he said. "Sometimes Mr. Bad Boy acts up, but I know he'll be good now." Mrs. Berman glared at him. "Your jokes are not acceptable." "I promise he'll behave," Ethan said. He shot me a nervous glance. Then he turned back to the audience. "I need a volunteer. Could you come up and talk to Mr. Bad Boy, ma'am? I promise he'll be good. Please come up here." I realized I was holding my breath. What did Ethan plan to do? Or more important, what did Mr. Bad Boy plan to do? Ethan kept pleading with her, so finally a gray-haired woman in a flowery brown and yellow house dress stood up and slowly walked up beside the grinning dummy. She shook Mr. Bad Boy's hand. "Are you going to be a good boy?" she asked, grinning at Ethan. Mr. Bad Boy's eyes blinked up and down. "I like your dress," he said. "Interesting colors, or did you spit up your breakfast this morning?" I gasped. Now I knew for sure. I had no doubts at all. The dummy was alive and out of control. The woman laughed. "You're naughty," she said. "Someone should spank you." "I'd like to spank you too," Mr. Bad Boy replied, "but with that face I can't tell which end to spank." I turned and saw Mrs. Berman shaking her head and frowning. Which color do you like in Brittany's painting? Mr. Badboy asked the woman. The red or the yellow? She studied my painting for a moment. The red, I guess. And then it all happened so quickly it was a total blur. I saw the jar of red paint swing up into the air. Was it in Mr. Badboy's hand or did Ethan hold the jar? I couldn't see, but I saw the jar swing high and I saw the red paint come splashing down. It made a loud splat as it burst over the woman's face. It ran down her cheeks, down her skirt, and puddled on her shoes. Her mouth dropped open in shock. She staggered back, wiping paint from her eyes, but Mr. Badboy wasn't finished. Now the yellow paint jar was in the air, and a tidal wave of thick yellow paint splashed over the woman's hair. I'm a bad boy, Mr. Badboy shouted. Mrs. Berman leaped forward and tried to pull the dummy from Ethan's arms, and I rushed to the front of the room, my brain spinning. I knew I had to do something to help, but I tripped over my easel. The whole thing collapsed under me, and I fell face down on my painting. Oh, I groaned and tried to pull myself to my feet. Smears of red and yellow paint stuck to the front of my sweater. I heard people stampeding from the room. Some were crying, others were shouting angrily. A disaster, I thought, a total disaster. Raising my eyes, I glared at the ugly dummy, and as I stared, he tossed back his head and roared with laughter. Chapter 16. Molly, where's your dad? I have to talk to him. That night, I was too upset to eat dinner. I rushed up to my room and slammed the door behind me. Then I dropped onto the edge of my bed and punched Molly's number into my cell phone. I told you, Molly replied. He's on some island near Australia. I haven't heard a word from him since he left. Well, when is he coming back? My voice cracked. It's a real emergency. Molly was silent for a moment. Britt, come over. You'll feel better if you get out of that house. I can't, I moaned. I'm grounded, probably for life. Mrs. Berman at Sunset House, she reported the whole thing to school. I don't believe it, but she blamed me for everything. She said I invited Ethan, so I had to know what kind of jokes he did. She said I had to know what Ethan planned to do. Oh, wow, Molly muttered. Bad news. That's totally unfair. Tell me about it, I groaned. Then Mrs. Berman called my mom and told her about it. I am so in trouble everywhere. I'm not allowed to leave my room at night. And meanwhile, get this. Dad had hockey tickets that he couldn't return, so he took Ethan to the hockey game. It's so not fair. Ethan is a total freak, Molly said. I can't believe he's your cousin. Ethan isn't the problem, I said. It's Mr. Badboy. He's alive, Molly. He's evil, and Ethan is too scared to do anything about it. But Britt, Molly, I am begging you to believe me, I said. No one else will. I'm not even allowed to mention the dummy to my mom or dad. But your dad, he'd believe me. He knows about this stuff, right? Well, Molly said, Dad has done research on ventriloquist dummies. I know he's collected a lot of magazine articles and papers. Come over, Britt. Sneak out and come over. We can try to find his file. I was totally desperate, so I sneaked out the back door and ran all the way to Molly's house. She greeted me in a pale blue t-shirt and red and white boxers. She had just washed her hair and had a red bath towel wrapped around her head like a turban. We turned on as many lights in the attic as we could, but the room still gave me the creeps, with ugly stuffed creatures and strange dolls staring out at us from the glass cases. I stopped to gaze at the empty shelf that had held the Mind Stealer doll. The shiver rolled down my back as I pictured the graveyard in the rain. Molly pulled me into her dad's library at the far end of the attic. One wall was lined with tall gray file cabinets. We began pawing through the file drawers, bulging with articles and magazines and photos and research papers about all the weird stuff Mr. Malloy was into. After about 20 minutes of searching, I pulled out a heavy file marked ventriloquism. Molly, check it out, I said. I lugged it to the desk, spread it open, and Molly and I began sifting through all the papers. Molly wrinkled her forehead. What exactly are we looking for? I sighed. Anything that will help me prove to my parents that Mr. Badboy has to be destroyed. My words caught in my throat. I stared at the wrinkled and faded black and white photo in front of me. I don't believe it, I gasped. It's Ethan's dummy, look. Molly lowered her face to the photo and studied it. The same chip on his bottom lip, she murmured. The same wicked grin. The same wicked smile. The same ugly grin, I said. My hand trembled as I picked up the photo and turned it over. The back was covered in tiny type. I squinted to read it. It says the dummy's real name is Slappy, I told Molly, and I was right, he's totally evil. My heart pounded as I scanned the words. It says Slappy was made by a magician sometime in the late 1800s, I said, an evil sorcerer. The wood he used was cursed. He built the dummy from a stolen coffin. Molly blinked. Oh, wow. I wish Dad was here. It says the dummy turns its owners into slaves, I continued. It's power mad. It wants to enslave everyone it meets, and... My eyes skipped to the bottom. I gasped and grabbed Molly's arm. Listen to this, Molly. It has a bunch of weird words at the bottom of the page. It says, say these 6 ancient words to wake him up and to put him asleep. You're kidding. Molly grabbed the photo from my hands and stared at it. This is excellent, Brittany. What are we waiting for? She handed the photo back to me. When she unwound the towel from her head and began drying her coppery hair. Come on, hurry, Britt. Let's do it. Let's shout the words in front of Slappy and put him back to sleep forever. You said Ethan is away at a hockey game, right? As we raced down the attic stairs, I raised the photo and read the ancient words silently one more time. Were my worries over? Would the words put Slappy to sleep? Chapter 17. I slipped into my house through the back door. I signaled to Molly to be quiet. Then we tiptoed across the kitchen to the front hall. I heard the thud of dance music from the den and glimpsed Mom on the couch with a magazine in her lap. Mom doesn't dance, but she loves disco music. The louder the better. So she didn't hear Molly and me as we hurried up the stairs and then made our way into the attic. Ethan had left all the lights on in his room. The place was a mess. He had dirty clothes heaped everywhere, PlayStation game discs and manga comics scattered over the floor, an open bag of cheese doodles on his computer keyboard, empty soda cans and balled-up jeans on his bed. Molly and I stepped through the mess to the far end of the room. Slappy was propped up on the brown leather armchair by the window. The dummy's hands rested on the chair arms. He stared straight ahead. We know your secret, Slappy, I said. My voice sounded funny, shrill and tight. My chest felt all fluttery. I tapped the dummy's wooden head. See, I even know your real name. I expected him to move or speak, but he just kept staring at the other wall. Molly dropped down on the edge of Ethan's cluttered bed. I could see she was frightened too. Don't mess around, she said softly. Read the words before he does something horrible. I held the photo tightly in both hands to keep them from shaking. Goodbye forever, Slappy, I said. And then slowly I whispered the ancient words. Karu, Mari, Adona, Loma, Molonu, Karano. Silence. I could hear the blood throbbing in my ears, and then I gasped as the dummy's hand slipped off the armchairs and he slumped forward until his head rested in his lap. He stayed there, limp and lifeless. I stood waiting and watching, but he didn't move again. Then I spun around and pumped both fists in the air. We did it, Molly, I cried happily. We put him to sleep. I expected Molly to jump up and celebrate too, but she didn't move. She stared hard at something on the bed. Molly, what's your problem? I cried. We did it. We're okay now. We put him to sleep. Wait a sec, Britt, Molly murmured. There's something here I think you should see. Chapter 18. Molly reached into the pocket of Ethan's crumpled jeans and pulled out a small rectangular object. It looked like a TV clicker. She dropped it onto the bed. Why was this hanging out of Ethan's pocket? Molly asked. I picked it up and rolled it around in my hand. It had at least a dozen red buttons on the front, but no words. No words anywhere on it. I pushed the top button. Then I gasped as Slappy began to move. He raised his head and laughed. Weird, Molly said. Push it again. I pushed the same button again. Slappy raised his head and laughed again. What's up with this? I cried. I aimed the clicker at Slappy and pushed another button. I'm alive, the dummy screamed in its tiny rasp of a voice. Don't you get it, Brittany? I'm alive. I pushed another button. Don't ever snitch on me again, the dummy said in a whisper. I pushed it again. Don't ever snitch on me again. My hand shook as I aimed the controller at Slappy and pushed another button. I don't like you, Brittany. Ugh! I let out an angry cry and heaved the clicker to the bed. He did it again, I screamed. That creep Ethan did it to me again. I grabbed up the jeans and threw them across the floor. I turned over the cheese doodles bag and emptied it on his keyboard. I knew I was totally losing it, but I couldn't control my fury. He must be some kind of electronic genius, Molly said. The dummy has a computer chip, right? Ethan recorded all those things he said. He deliberately did it all to scare you. It's so totally mean, I said, fighting back tears. Ethan spilled the paint on that woman at Sunset House and insulted those people and ripped my poster in half, and he acted so frightened like he didn't have any control over the dummy. All an act, all a stupid act. I tore at both sides of my hair. Ugh, I knew Ethan was trouble, I said, but I never dreamed he was so mean and vicious. Molly climbed to her feet. What are you going to do now? I let out a long sigh. I don't know. Are you going to tell him you know what he did? Molly demanded. Are you going to tell your parents? Are you going to wait a while and get your revenge? I don't know, I repeated, my mind spinning. A smile slowly spread across my face. But I know one thing for sure, Molly. I'm going to get a good night's sleep tonight. No more reason to be scared. I'm never going to have to worry about that stupid dummy again. I felt a soft tap on my shoulder. Huh? I blinked. Another tap. I was having the nicest dream, but it vanished as my eyes opened. My brain slowly woke up. Yawning, I glimpsed my bed table alarm clock. It was 2:35 in the morning. I felt another tap on my shoulder, harder this time. Now I was fully awake. I rolled around and squinted into the darkness. Ethan, what do you want? And then I opened my mouth in a frightened cry. Slappy! The dummy lowered his grinning face. The big blue eyes locked on mine. His wooden hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Thanks, he whispered in my ear. Thanks for waking me up, slave. Chapter 19. The wooden fingers tightened around my wrist, tighter, until I wanted to scream. Pain shot up my arm. Let go of me, I cried. The dummy lowered his face over me until our noses nearly touched. Thank you, slave, he rasped. You called out the words to wake me up. No, I gasped. I didn't mean to. He snickered an ugly laugh from deep in his throat. You're my slave now, Brittany. You'll do whatever I say. Why should I? I choked out, struggling to pull my wrist free. Mom and Dad will... Go ahead. Tell your parents, he said. He snickered again. Go ahead. I'd like that. Know what they'll think? They'll think you've gone crazy. They won't believe a word. They'll take you to a doctor. He released my wrist. His painted grin appeared to grow wider. Are you ready for your first task? No, I stammered. Go away. You can't force me to do anything. He uttered a low growl and straightened up. Then he raised both fists in front of me. I can hurt you, Brittany, he snarled. I'm not playing games. Get up and get dressed. Why? What do you want? I stammered. You're going to take a short trip, Slappy said. Back to that graveyard. I heard that little freak Ethan talking about the mind stealer you buried. I want it. I need it. He gave me a hard shove with both wooden hands. Go get it, Brittany. Dig it up and bring it to me. I rolled out of bed and landed on my feet. My heart thudded in my chest, but I suddenly felt more angry than afraid. No way I was going to take orders from a wooden dummy. Out of my face, I shouted. I lowered my shoulder and grabbed Slappy around the waist. My plan was to lift him off the floor and heave him out of my room. Oh, I uttered a groan as I strained to pull him up. He wouldn't budge. Nice try, Britt, he said. Here, hit me in the stomach. Hit me as hard as you can. He stuck out his skinny stomach and giggled. I took a step back. I tried to remember the 6 ancient words to put him back to sleep forever. Think, Brittany, think, I told myself. It was useless. I couldn't remember them. Maybe this was more evil than I could handle, but I wasn't going back to that graveyard. I wasn't going to be a slave. No way. I crossed my arms in front of me. I'm not going back to that graveyard, I said slowly through gritted teeth. He froze there and stared at me for the longest time, long enough for chill after chill to shiver my body. No problem, he whispered finally. Fine with me, Britt. I'll go get it. But when I have that doll, your mind will be the first to be sucked dry. Then you'll be a perfect slave, won't you, my dear? Chapter 20. He spun away from me and started walking out of my room. He walked stiffly, not bending his knees, his shoulders teetering from side to side like a zombie in a horror movie. Frozen in terror, I couldn't move. Clump, clump, clump. I listened to him thump down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard the door close behind him. He's really doing it. He's going to the graveyard to get the doll, I realized. I had to stop him. I bolted into the hall, then stopped. I realized I was in my nightshirt. I lurched back into my room, grabbed jeans and a sweatshirt, pulled on my sneakers, and hurried out of the house. It was a cool, clear night. Thin snakes of black cloud curled over a full moon. My shoes squished over the slippery grass as I ran to the street. It must have rained earlier. Puddles of silver moonlight glowed in the street. I saw Slappy clumping through the puddles. He swung his arms as he stormed up the low hill that led to the graveyard. He kept his back straight and tall, his head straight forward as he staggered up the middle of the road. The cool night air helped wake me up. I started to trot. I didn't want to catch up with him, but I didn't want to lose sight of him either. My heart thumped loudly. In the late night silence, nothing moved. No wind, no cars or voices, the houses all dark, as if Slappy and I were the only two creatures on Earth. Stepping over the silvery puddles, I followed Slappy to the little graveyard. I watched from the other side of the picket fence as he made his way quickly through the rows of crooked gravestones. He stopped at the spot where we buried the Mind Stealer doll and dropped to his knees. My breath caught in my throat. I watched him start to scoop up dirt. His wooden hands made good shovels. The dirt flew up in front of him. I knew I should leap over the fence, drop him, smother him, crush him, do anything to keep him from pulling up that dangerous doll. But my fear held me there against the fence. My legs felt trembly and weak, and I had to force myself to breathe as I watched the hole grow larger and larger under the dummy's shoveling hands. He giggled as he bent over the hole and pulled out the glass case. He whipped his head around once, making sure no one was watching. I ducked behind the fence and held my breath. Had he seen me? No. I raised myself high enough to watch him. He pulled himself quickly to his feet and began brushing dirt off the case with one hand. In the eerie silver moonlight, I could see the doll. I could see its shrunken human head bouncing against the glass bottom as Slappy cleaned the case. And then, Slappy set the case down gently on the ground and began to pull off the lid. I gripped the top of the fence so tightly my hands ached, and suddenly I heard a voice in my head. My voice. If he gets that doll, he'll wipe your mind clean. And before I even realized what I was doing, I leaped over